So for how many years have you been touring Europe?
Almost 50 years. My first tour of Europe was in 1973 with Stan Kenton.
All right, so is there any way you could sort of summarize the changes in the jazz audience that you have witnessed in Europe?
Well, to answer the question, I'm going to approach it from a personal point of view.
Absolutely.
And the changes might be more obvious to me as being changes in my own playing, because the European audience has always been an enthusiastic one. I think as I gained more experience and grew older, I sensed that the audiences were a bit more discerning and less blindly enthusiastic. But I think that was a different audience that I was playing for because my playing had changed. So in other words, the audiences for the Kenton band were, wow, Stan Kenton Big Band. Which is a slightly different audience than, a trio with John Taylor and Pally Danielson, or Kenny Wheeler's band, or John Abercrombie.
Or Weather Report, or whoever you were over here with.
Weather Report, it was, they were large audiences, maybe the biggest ones I played for in Europe.
Right.
But, we weren't aware of much else than what was happening on stage. The idea was to be playing as if we were sitting out in the audience, but there wasn't an intimate connection with audiences. And I don't know if that's just the nature of the volume of the music. There was no presenting, separating us from the audience per se, but there was a distance that may have been imposed not only sonically, but might also have been partly by design. The way that band operated, the way its whole macho ethos, and frankly, I would say the drug use in the band too, because drug use is a very isolating kind of thing, and people become just very wrapped up in their own universe.
Self-isolating and distancing at the same time, in a way. I think my question probably also relates to the sense I have that there's a kind of unification of the audience developing across oceans and among the various continents. And it probably has something to do with digital technology and our ability to access musics from faraway places that normally required a whole lot of deep diving and research. And one of the consequences of the digital revolution is that the world, in this sense anyway, can be viewed as a smaller place just by dint of these musical languages that we can get next to more readily. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of a setup for my question for you in that, have you felt the effects of this kind of accelerated technological world as it refers to how you hear, play, process music? Is that a part of a view that it has been made clear in more recent years than in the past?
I mean, one of the interesting aspects is that new generations become familiar with my work, kind of looking at it through the wrong end of the telescope.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that.
Oh, thanks.
Uh-huh.
Wow, they discover Weather Report, or they discover some album that I may have done some time ago, and they might become a fan of either that individual work or me in general, thanks to this chancing upon some of the music that the internet affords.
A random encounter.
Kind of. I mean, when I was young, our exposure to jazz, which was pretty great, but you had to be aware that it was being broadcast on television, usually by CBS. And you would plan your weekend or your week or your month around that event. You didn't want to miss that. And if you missed it, you were out of luck. There was no replay, no rewind. It was just TV. We developed relationships with recorded music. We got an album. An album had 18 to 20 minutes maximum per LP side of music. And the LP format allowed for a lot of legible text that you could actually read, and photographs that you could actually look at, and you could identify with the people in the photos. You could dream about having either been a fly on the wall or maybe even being one of those musicians. If you're a young musician, we would daydream. And so we became intimately familiar with this music. You listened. You got an album. You would listen to it over and over and over, and the sequencing of the songs, and sometimes you wouldn't even get to the second side of the LP. If this first side's so good, I just want to stick with this.
I want to hang with it.
Contrasted to someone having 10,000 songs in their phone, it's hard to develop an intimate relationship with music that is presented like that. So people today have to make a different kind of effort to find that music. On the other hand, they can find it like that. I mean, almost anything.
Instantaneously.
Yeah, which is great.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those old timers that when I was young, we did things. Well, we certainly did things differently, but I think the young musicians today play better than ever. And maybe we can pat ourselves on the back at least for having done some aspects of jazz education right. Because it's not just the talent level, but just the virtuosic level of playing is, they're doing stuff that we didn't even dream of. Just from a drumming point of view.
From a drumming point of view, yeah.
And so, as educators, we try to balance out, to bring these other things into play. And, you didn't ask this, but I'm going there in terms of teaching. The words I use more often than any other during the course of a year are intention, as in trying to get a student to play with intention, and being specific. Specificity, which are the same two words that they use in theater, that they use in film, all areas of art, I think. But for music, a lot of my lessons we watch scenes from film, because I think there's a lot to learn from that.
Intention and
specificity.
I actually have another one that I want to add to that list, which I think might somehow dovetail into your philosophy. It always seemed to me that the concept of believability was vital, in that when you listen to someone, not only do I need to believe them, but I need to feel that they believe themselves, so that there is an authentic kind of interior transaction going on, but then also that it somehow gets expressed to an audience. So these things, they kind of strike me as inviolate. I mean, those are like fundamentals that you can't skirt around them if you're attempting to be an honest and expressive musician.
Well, you can if you are open to the opportunity of learning from. Having done that, then what was the result?
Right.
A lot of times with my students, they'll play something and I record it. And I say, okay, that was great, man. We're going to start your first record. That'll be the first tune. And you cool with that, or you want to do it again? I think it's a great take. And they go, no, I would do it again. Oh, yeah? What would you do different?
What a great question that is.
And then they well, I would do this. Well, let's try that. See what happens. So hearing oneself is a really great way to learn. And I mean, nowadays we can hear ourselves like great. Back when I was growing up, the quality of the reel-to-reel tape recorders we had, or the microphones, it wasn't that great.
Yes.
And nowadays, I mean, everybody's got a recording studio in their home, just about. And so with this democratization of technology, it's brought a lot of opportunities to not only great musicians, because we can record at home and collaborate in a different kind of way, but also to musicians who are still in development.
And this gains expression in platforms like the Jam Music Lab, where you are, in effect, while you're covering the 3,000 miles from LA to New York, and then another 3,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean, and here we are, presto, in Vienna. It seems to me that there are very discernible benefits to the advent of technology that allows you to kind of help develop students in that manner.
It's amazing.
Amazing.
What we can do. I mean, because we are having rehearsals in real time,
Right.
not asynchronous, but in the moment. It's just however many milliseconds of delay. So the ensemble that I was coaching last semester, they would play. I could listen. I could offer some feedback. Why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? Or sometimes that was fantastic. Other times that was not very good. Did you do your homework? And one time I had to be, the stern teacher.
I remember that moment. I was not one of your students on this particular day, but I was scared. And I thought it was a brilliantly effective way of motivating people at that moment.
Well, they responded well to it.
Yes, they did.
And I think because that most essential quality that we look for in ensembles, that trust, the believability, was there. They believed me. I wasn't doing it for effect. And they trusted me that I had their interest at heart. It wasn't.
Peter, I'm so taken by the notion that this becomes one of the fundamental lessons surrounding learning music. I mean, this is as fundamental a lesson, I think, as mastering or attempting to master your instrument, learning scales and practicing and all that. It's kind of an attitudinal approach that establishes like the primacy hierarchy of where music should be in your life. I mean, in your dedication to this stuff. I kind of think that is that's like foundational to everything. It seems to me.
I think so. I always have that little balancing, this little spinning thought. Years ago, I'd gone to a regional jazz festival in Kansas, and it was a community college, and I was happy to be there. And I saw my presence as being one of trying to be motivational, give information. But I had no illusions about what the ultimate destinies might be for most of these players. And there was a young educator. He had just graduated from one of the East Coast schools, and he's lecturing. Now, here's a trombone player in his Oshkosh overalls. His dad's let him off the farm to attend this thing. He's probably got to get back to manning the tractor to plow the field.
Feeding the horses.
And this guy's giving them a stern lecture of how they'll never make it in the New York studios. Really? Come on. So the beauty of ensembles, it's I mean, I was going to use basketball as an analogy, but we could also use football. But if we're playing basketball, and I'm not a very good basketball player, but if I'm going to play it, I'm going to pay attention. I'm not going to be looking at my mobile phone while we're playing the game, because it's disrespectful to the other players, and it's just a waste of everybody's time. If you're going to do something, let's make it the best it can be, right? And that's what ensembles teach you, to pay attention to the other. And by surrendering a part of yourself, it actually ennobles and strengthens a much more important part of yourself, while at the same time providing a form of glue for the other players. So it's a beautiful lesson in balance of life and diplomacy, and getting what you want by not having to speak it out loud necessarily. And then it really becomes the art of paying attention. Now, my curse is that I carry this into my everyday life. When I'm driving, I want people to pay attention. I start wanting to direct, cars. There's all this space, but come on, close the gap. The lights change. Please make the turn. Which makes it function better for everyone.
You're conducting life is what you're doing.
Yeah, which I shouldn't do, and I have to learn not to do, because it's making me crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this is a very good point. But you just cited this idea of dependence and independence almost occurring concurrently within an ensemble setting. And I just thought that in other circumstances that might be considered contradictory or an oxymoron, but in fact, that's exactly what it is, don't you think?
Yeah, it's yin and yang. It's the how did Jung put it?
Carl?
Yeah. Was it the animan? It's the female spirit and the male spirit.
Oh, the anima?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Help.
Okay. We're referencing Carl Jung. I wasn't prepared for that.
Oh, and look at that. And that's Carl Jung on my phone. Sorry, Carl.
So let me shift ever so gently, because another thing you mentioned earlier about fundamental things you listen for or to. One of the reasons I was attracted to the Jam Music Lab was because it offered a high or an advanced level of study in pop music. I'm far more familiar, as perhaps you are in the States, with jazz studies and music studies that are very, very specifically tailored to jazz lovers. But I was taken by the fact that pop music was elevated to a high enough level that it deserved the kind of academic scrutiny that kind of married it on a level with jazz, and then perhaps ultimately will marry it on the level of classical music, which is the tradition in Vienna, of course. Have you had to make various distinctions in attitude, approach, style, educational strategies when kind of working in one of the genres versus the other?
Well, I mean, this is familiar territory for me, because the Thornton School of Music at USC developed a pop music degree program quite a few years ago. And, as a drummer, I realized some time ago that the pop drummers figured out one of the great secrets to music making way before the jazz guys, and that was playing for the song. Play what the song needed. No more, no less. And there's a genius to that instinctive discipline that a lot of pop musicians understand. And so, for me, it was just very instructive. It was the thing not only to kind of try to learn myself, but to teach to my students this kind of sensibility of focus and playing what the song needs. So I think it's the right thing at the right moment that Jam is bringing jazz and popular music in a conservatory setting in the city of conservatories, in the city that is the greatest setting for music conservatories, Vienna. I mean, this really is the crossroads of and birthplace of art, and in the Western world, just about. So
on the globe, perhaps.
yeah.
Like, completely.
So, I mean, for years we've always looked to Vienna. Psychiatry had its home here.
Absolutely. Something you know about with your dad.
Yeah, my dad was a psychiatrist. I wish he could have visited Freud's home. I got to. My dad never came to Austria. That would have been a kick.
You were the surrogate Erskine that actually did it. Well, that's nice. Very nice.
And so much of the science of the psyche and music. I mean, Hollywood. I live in Los Angeles. Hollywood would not exist without Vienna, because the two most important film composers at the beginning of sound, Max Steiner and Erich Wolfgang Corngold, were both products of Vienna. So, when you hear the score by John Williams, I mean, he would be the first to acknowledge that.
His great debt.
Yeah, the debt to Vienna.
And this is probably simplistic and childlike, but those are qualities that have followed me my whole life. But the kind of stark humanism that I connect to Vienna, these individuals you cite, Steiner, I mean, there's such rich kind of a rich humanistic approach in that music that somehow was able to sort of translate, very complex emotions. Speaking in terms of his film work.
Oh, Zawinul.
Zawinul.
For goodness sake.
Perfect example. Of
yeah,
course.
I mean, the way that he could inject or interject a folk melody into the world of jazz, and play the most hauntingly simple, beautiful thing.
That might be such a brilliant observation, Peter, that it's almost like I'm having a duh moment. Joe, of course. And in a way, he kind of brings us in sort of full circle, in effect, to what the jam attempts to do. And you would agree, I'm assuming you would agree, that he's probably Austria's father figure in the realm of jazz, and kind of the popularization of jazz. And is that a fair thing to say?
I'm not Austrian,
Okay.
But Gulda, Friedrich Gulda was his mentor, and Gulda was the all-important figure of, kind of a trailblazer
Opening things up
for jazz. In Austria, and then with post-war Vienna, and then Joe going to America and making good, and then coming back. And it was one of his trips coming back home to visit his parents that he wrote In a Silent Way. The first evening I think they spent back in Austria, it was snowing, and he composed it.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I never thought of Joe as our generation's Max Steiner, in effect. But there's something to discuss there.
Or Corngold. I mean, because it was Joe that actually turned me on to Corngold. And in fact, we were somewhere in Europe. I seem to recall it was Germany, but we're somewhere. And I went out on stage, and Joe was playing this gorgeous melody. And it was the second or third day in a row I'd heard him toying with this. And I said, Joe, it's beautiful. Is this something you're writing? He goes, no, it's not mine. It's homeboy, Eric, and he called him Erich von Corngold.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Erich von Corngold. So, and I didn't put two and two together. I come back from, I think it was maybe Fat Tuesdays in New York, very late one night. I'd had my good share of drink, and I turn on the radio in the bedroom of my apartment, and I hear this stirring music. And I'm getting undressed, and wow, that was great. And the announcer mentioned, and so I wrote it down and passed out, fell asleep. So the next morning, I get up and I see this note I had written, Corngold Violin Concerto. So I decided to walk downtown to Tower Records. It was quite a walk, because I lived up near the post office. And I find a recording, find an LP, and I bring it back, and I'm playing it in my apartment, and all of a sudden, I recognize this is the melody that Zavana was playing. This is the piece. I have to find his music. So I rush uptown to Padelson's. This was the big sheet music store near Carnegie Hall. Yeah. And I find a sales representative, and they say, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yes, I'm looking. Do you have any music by Eric Wolfgang Corngold?" So we go to the K section. He's looking, and he turns to me. He goes, "Actually, I never cared much for his music." So I was a real New Yorker at that point. I said, "Oh yeah? I didn't ask you that."
Excellent. Very good.
I asked you, "Do you have any of it?"
And you got some.
No. Then he's kind of like, "No, we don't."
Yeah.
So as I began touring Europe, there was an antique music shop in Berlin. This was when Berlin was still East and West Berlin. Mm-hmm. But they had they would always have some new old piece of Corngold's that I would find. And so I began collecting his music, and I started collecting his autographs. And,
oh, really?
I'd find them. And yes, I have a nice little collection of...
a massive exercise in connecting the dots. I mean, this whole thing from Corngold to Joe.
Well, the two autographs I bought on eBay were Corngold and Leonard Bernstein. And
which brings us full circle.
They both hang
prominently
prominently in my music studio at my desk. And so the thrill of jam, not only being able to meet some of the musicians I only met through the computer monitor,
right.
like Kosi, that wonderful violinist, is also to be here as part of this celebration of Leonard Bernstein. And it's a real thrill. And Danny Grissett just did the greatest arrangements. And we're doing one arrangement by my colleague back in Los Angeles, Alan Pasqua. And today's it's been a thrill.
And I just want to summarize by offering you a compliment. Are you okay with compliments?
Sure.
Okay. As I understand the jazz landscape in America, I don't think that there are many guys who could fulfill this role as you have, just by dint of you being you. And so for that reason alone, I feel a great sense of personal pride. So glad you're here.
Well, I can only take your compliment and send it back as a boomerang with the big words, "Thank you," on it, because you made this possible. And also to Marcus Radke.
Yes.
I thank him and everyone who has made the Jam Music Lab University possible. I like that. That's a nice logo.
I see it as books, by the way. I know you might see it as piano keys. I see it as an educational thing, stacks of books.
Wow.
Different perspective.
I see it as a keyboard.
Yeah, I had a feeling. Okay.